because a lot of times they would come in with I was fired, I was let go, I lost my job. I need something that will pay the bills. And I would often ask them, well, what are you looking for? And they would say anything, right? And then when they would say, well, I'm looking for this, and I would ask them, why are you looking for that? And a lot of times their answer is like, because that's what I've always done.
Yeah.
And, you follow with did you like doing that? And they're like, not really, but that's what I'm good at.
Yeah, that's right.
It's what differentiates, those employees who go to work and they wake up with purpose than with those who just wake up for a paycheck and they're like, oh, life is supposed to suck. The work is supposed to be awful.
Yeah.
So there's a big difference in just finding that happiness and that value that you get from work.
Have you enjoyed listening to the IncrediPaul podcast? Are you looking for a way to support it? Or maybe you just want some swag? Check out the IncrediPaul store today. We have shirts, hoodies, sweatshirts, hats, stickers, and so much more. Go to IncrediPaul.org, IncrediPaul.org, and click on the store link. Or go to the link in my socials bio and click on the IncrediPaul shop. Looking forward to seeing your IncrediPaul look.
Turn this up! Turn this up!
Your professional development is one of the keys to your career success. When you combine your desire to grow with actionable steps, your journey to success becomes an incredible reality. Welcome to the IncrediPaul podcast. And now, sharing his expertise, experience, and excellence with the world, here's your host, Paul Faranbi.
Welcome to the IncrediPaul podcast, where we learn to become the best versions of ourselves by learning from each other. I have the honor of having Erick with me, who is an engineer turned career coach that focuses on family and overcoming fears. That's a little bit about him, but Erick, how about you introduce yourself the way you would do it?
Yeah, of course. Thank you very much for having me here. First off, it's great to be here. The honor is mine. But yeah, you got it. Just, that intro is perfect. I have a big passion for family. And also I noticed as the transition from engineer to career coach, that fear was always a big, just a roadblock basically, right? It just had me slow down, had me do things cautiously, slowly. And I decided to, take some steps, overcome many fears, and ultimately come to a point where I could lead in any way I wanted, because the fear was just, it was no longer stopping. It might have been there, but it was no longer the obstacle that it once was. So yeah, became a career coach, help people overcome those fears as well, particularly through preparation. And that's about the intro.
I like it. I like it a lot. You were breaking up a little bit. I don't know if it's it's like thunderstorming outside, so I don't know if it's my connection or your connection. But
okay.
Well, got most of it. But
all right.
Yeah, but no, that's really cool. Yeah, fear is definitely something that can be limiting at times. And so how did you even go about, because what you kind of said is that you still had the fear, but you kind of contained it. So how did you even go about doing that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So at first, the first fear that I always had was the fear of losing my job. And that was at the root of things that ultimately hurt my family, right? Because with many, especially sole providers, you have this fear of, if I lose my job, how am I going to provide for them? And so that caused a conundrum, because you want to not only provide for your family, but you want to be there for them as well. You want to take care of them, as your kids are growing, as your family faces struggles that they inevitably will. You need to be there for them. But sometimes, because of that fear, what happened to me was I would put work first and I would put family second, even though the very reason I'm working is for family. So that fear of losing your job, that fear of hearing the words you're fired or you're being let go or whatever it is, had me just work more than I needed to, spend more time, think about work at home. And if there were any conflicts between family and work, usually work would win, which is something that happens to most people, I think. But it came to a point where some things got rough, and I was just like, well, I have to make a choice. and I chose family. It put me at odds with work. And I just did not like that I was in that position. And so the next time around, I started to prepare, particularly with my time and my finances, to a point where I could cut myself off from my paycheck. And the moment I was no longer afraid, because I had prepared, of hearing the words "you're fired," I could be myself. I could set up boundaries. I could say no. I could take on challenges that I was ready for. I could control my career, say this is my next step, not where my manager wants to take me, but where I want to go. And life became much more happy, sweeter. I felt like I was in control. And once I had that, I was like, yeah, I mean, some things were scary, like leaving a job and becoming your own boss, try to create something for yourself. Scary, but it was like, it's just part of life now. So it became something that I enjoy now, facing fears.
Yeah, no, that's really powerful. I like how you walk through the preparation that you took in order to step out and face your fear. So I know you've been talking about family. Like, tell us a little bit more about your family. And quick, before you do that, for those of you who are listening to the podcast, definitely go and watch the podcast. Erick has a fantastic tie on, and you're not seeing it right now. I love the tie. But go ahead, tell us about your family.
Yeah, so my family consists of now 4 people. So it's me, my wife, and 2 kids. I have my oldest one is Emma. She's almost 8 years old. And my youngest is Ben, and he is almost 1. So
oh wow,
if I fall asleep in the podcast, it's because I haven't slept for a while. So
I was gonna say,
no, it's good. They're amazing. Love the family.
That's amazing. So with that, how do you balance the what you do with your family? So I know you mentioned you've been doing stuff with the coaching. Like, how do you balance all that? Because I know some of that stuff can get overwhelming, or just trying to do all this, because you are your own boss. You have to make sure things get done. Are you wondering what's next? Has everything you tried failed? Or maybe you just feel stuck? Then coaching might be right for you. The coaching relationship is a relationship totally centered on you. If you're tired of running on the hamster wheel of life and want to start to see results, reach out to IncrediPaul for help. So what are you waiting for? Go to IncrediPaul.org/coaching, IncrediPaul.org/coaching, or at IamIncrediPaul on all my socials. Or you can click the link in the bio for your free coaching session. I want to make sure you become the most incredible version of yourself.
Yeah. No, that's an excellent question. So you balance it with your wife. It's very simple to say. But what I learned, especially with family, is that if I go at it myself, but just like I need to work, I need to do more, I have to spend 60 hours a week doing this, I'm abandoning my family. And a lot of times my wife, sometimes she might understand, sometimes she might not, but when she doesn't, I can work 60 hours and output 30 hours worth because I'm at odds at home, right?
Yeah.
So I found that if I can find alignment, and that's something leaders do, right? If you find alignment with your team, if you understand each other, that's the piece where you start to not only counsel together, but also work together as well. So a lot of times I would go to my wife and we sit down and discuss our finances as a partnership. And we're like, this is what we need. And I would say, hey, maybe I need this more time this week. Does that conflict with anything for you? And she would tell me yes, no, when she wants to have a vacation, when she needs a break. And so having that mutual partnership, like that true partnership, allowed me to flow better, because even if we made mistakes, even if our plans didn't go as we expected, we did it together. And that was a huge, just safety, peace of mind that it gave me, because I was like, hey, I have a partner and we made the decisions together. If this fails, we're in it together. We don't finger point. We don't, shift the blame. We did it together. We understood as much as we can. And the balance comes that way. It shifts, right? Sometimes there's more work, sometimes there's more family, but we do it together.
No, I really like that idea. What you talked about with partnership with your wife. I think a lot of times there's the idea that we don't communicate effectively with our partners or our spouses about things. So we just assume things. We all know what happens when you assume things. They don't go well. So I really like how you guys sit down together and you talk about how things are going, and even like the time management part of it. Like if you need more time this week, if she can take something, then there's a give and take. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've noticed that we both speak English, but we don't speak the same English. I don't know if you can relate, right?
Yeah.
Like for example, in the past, we had one of the first things we had to define was what does success look like for both of us, right?
Mhm.
For me at work was success means I spend time with you guys after we have a lot of money and we're very stable financially. So we had very similar ideas. We just had different methods to get there.
Yeah.
And that would often put us at odds. So all we had to do is basically go back to like, are we still striving for the same thing? If so, okay, let's find a work together. So yeah, just being able to define those key points that, like you said, we assume the other person understand, it can make all the difference.
Yeah. Well, that's so true. That's so true. I like, because what you're kind of mentioning reminds me of like what you mentioned earlier with leadership and having a clear vision of where you're trying to go and making sure that's aligned. So I'm curious for your company, for what you're doing, do you have like a vision or mission kind of written out of what you're trying to accomplish?
That is an excellent question. So I had to shift things a little bit. When I first started, I wanted to create a program that would allow people to overcome their fear, particularly through preparation. I called it the Fearless Career. After investigating more, going through like a beta program and having about a dozen people go through it, that's when I realized this actually takes a lot more time. So I had to go back with my wife, reassess a few things.
Okay.
And I was thinking, am I willing to be married to this now? Right. And so that's where we had to kind of step back and turn it into a course. So the vision was changed. But ultimately, my goal with that course, with that program, whatever you might want to call it, is I want people to be proactive and take charge of their careers, because I have been helping so many people now find work that a lot of times they wait till the last minute, till they're laid off, they're downsized, they're fired, or whatever it might be. And then they're frantic, they're panicking, and that's the worst state to go into a job hunt. So, but if you're prepared, if you know what your finances are, if you have networked, if you know your next step, you have your resume ready, all these things, somebody firing you could be the best thing that happened to you. You're like, great, now I'm ready for my next opportunity. And there's that lack of fear, there's more confidence. And it's just, that's what I saw, I wanted for people. And so that's kind of my vision. I wanted to give to others what I learned without them having to struggle as I did.
That's so awesome. That I really commend you for that, because I feel like in this world we're in, a lot of times we don't see people going back and helping. Everyone's just trying to build things on their own. But this whole idea I talk about, like lifting as you climb, like you're trying to work yourself up, but you're also lifting others to get to where you are as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Whenever I was in a leadership position and I wanted to enforce my will, it did not go well. Right. But when I had the mentality of like, more of that servant leadership style, that's where people, they saw two things that I noticed. It motivated people. So first thing was your devotion to the people. You care for them, you lift them up. By so doing, they take care of you.
Yeah. And
I would say the other thing is your what's the word here? Your conviction to whatever cause it is that you have. If you have a vision and you're committed to it, you have that conviction, they know that this is not fake. Because I think employees can discern fairly. It's like, hey, he's saying this because he's paid to do that. Yeah. But when you're there and you really believe it, it's contagious. People want to be by it, right? Like look at Simon Sinek, for example. I believe like he believes. Like I want to follow this. because he has that conviction. So those are the things that I've learned about leadership that really makes others stand out, but they're not easy to get. That's the difficult part. So
that's so true. You mentioned Simon Sinek, and I really like his book Starting with Why, and it looks like you really know your why, and that's why you're able to really focus on it and develop it continuously. And even when what you mentioned, that it may look a little different from what you're trying to do when you shifted courses, but you still have your same why and you're just walking towards that. I really like that.
Yeah, absolutely. That why became huge for me, especially when I would help people find work, because a lot of times they would come in with I was fired, I was let go, I lost my job. I need something that would pay the bills. And I would often ask them, well, what are you looking for? And they would say anything, right? And then when they would say, well, I'm looking for this, and I would ask them, why are you looking for that? And a lot of times their answer is like, because that's what I've always done.
Yeah.
And, you follow with did you like doing that? And they're like, not really, but that's what I'm good at.
Yeah, that's right.
It's what differentiates, those employees who go to work and they wake up with purpose, than with those who just wake up for a paycheck and they're like, oh, life is supposed to suck. The work is supposed to be awful.
Yeah.
So there's a big difference in just finding that happiness and that value that you get from work.
That's so true. You can get fulfillment in your work, and I feel like for whatever reason, maybe it's life or just like what you've learned from other people, that we often feel like work is supposed to suck, and it's like it doesn't have to.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's good. That's good. So I know you mentioned that you worked in engineering, you worked in leadership. Can you give us some background of like where you work, what you did before you transitioned into doing coaching?
Yeah, sure. I'll tell you my story. I graduated with a bachelor's in chemical engineering.
Awesome.
Right after that, it's hard. I did it because one of the reasons I did it is because people told me it's the hardest, and I was like, well, let's go and do it. How hard can it be? Well, it's hard because the moment I left school, I thought I'm not going back there. But I might. I probably will get my MBA and other leadership degrees. But after I left that, I didn't want to go into oil and gas. The passion wasn't there, right? My why wasn't there. My why was more on the helping people side, particularly healthcare. So I went into medical devices. Awesome. And I went to work for a company called Edwards Life Sciences. Yeah, they had a very strong mission of, patients first. That was always the North Star or anything that guided our decisions. And I loved that about the company. It was like, you do things for the better, you make the right choices. And it was very, very ethical. And I loved it. Nice. I was more on the software quality side of things. Then at another point, I went to a different company to try leadership. And that's where I thought it's like, hey, that's a path I wanted to follow. So I became the health and safety leader for the company. And so I went through all the OSHA trainings, EPA, things like that. And oh, wow. And I was just like, hey, this is a lot to take in. So I created a program. I created, and I did all the trainings and all these things, just managed all of that stuff. And then COVID hit and everything went sideways. Yeah. And that's the part I would say that taught me more about leadership than anything else, because when things get really tough, right? When all of a sudden your work gets flipped upside down, your family life gets flipped upside down, because there was no preparation, right? We at least from my age and the people that were in the company, there was no precedent of there's a pandemic that's going to shut down the country. Yeah. So we had to learn, and at that point, I either had to put myself first or put others first, right? And I always thought, well, true leaders put others first. That's the part where ultimately led me to resign from that position, because I could no longer juggle my family, which really, really needed me, and putting others first at work, because they really needed me as well because of my position. So at that point, I resigned, and I went back to Edwards. I worked from home. I created this office. I did more like systems engineering at that point. Okay. It was, honestly, I would say, a very, very comfortable job. I had the environment I wanted. My teammates were fantastic. It was just very, very comfortable. And after that, I was like, hey, I started preparing so I wouldn't have any more of that fear.
Yeah.
And that's where I started to coach a few people just on the side.
Yeah.
And I started to see the results from that set coaching for them and for me. And I was like, I really like that. I want to do that more. So I decided to take the next step and try and make this work. So here I am.
That's awesome. That's really cool. I know you mentioned that you kind of talked about it, that there's some preparation you did as you were transitioning from, you went to Edwards Life Sciences, you did a leadership role, COVID hit, you went back to Edwards Life Sciences, you were comfortable, but then you got this inkling to do more and help people. And so at what point did you feel comfortable enough to make the jump to do stuff on your own?
Yeah, that's a great question, because not many people know what happened in that point. So my plan was to continue to build at night, because that's all the coaching that I did, all the preparation, the courses I created, it was all at night between like 10 p.m. and 12 p.m. or a.m. I guess.
Oh, wow.
Because that's the time that I was like, hey, this is my potentially commute time, but I'm going to use it to build this thing. And my plan was originally to make it from that time, which was like the beginning of 2022 until the end of 2023.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to give myself this entire year to build that and then launch.
Mm-hmm.
What happened was that I'm a fairly religious person, and it came to a point where I think I was talking to a friend who had done this entrepreneurial journey as well.
Yeah.
And one thing that he told me is, because I asked him, it's like, hey, how did you learn? What would you suggest, right?
Yeah.
And he basically told me, I would tell you one thing that stands about all other things is, when you jump to do this on your own, if you rely on God, you will get to know him better than anything else in life, because by necessity you have to be close to him. And I felt like that's something that I was missing in my life. I grew up believing in God, going to church.
Yeah.
I read my scriptures, right? But there was a huge difference in reading that and being raised that way to all of a sudden being truly converted to it and relying on God in a way that says, you take care of this because I can't.
Yes.
So at that point, I decided to jump, and I was like, if anything, I want to get to know you better, because I know I'm missing that in my life.
Yeah.
So I made the leap about a year and 2 or 3 months before I planned to do it. Very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
A leap of faith, I would say. And the first 2 weeks was about panic mode. I was moving through things, but I was like, I wish I had more savings. I had enough, to last me a few months. So I wasn't. I had prepared, but it was honestly a leap of faith at that point. And I had to, just get really close to him through prayer, fasting, scripture study, and going to a temple and things like that. And at that point, I discovered that, because we're not turning this into more of a religious topic, but I discovered that relying on God actually gave me more fearlessness than I had given myself.
No, that's awesome. I think that's important. That's a part of you. And I also say that Jesus is first and I am second, because I think that's a huge part of everything I do that's why everything I do, I say I try to add value to people, because people are valuable. I want to bring the best out of people, and however I can do it, whether it's through podcasting, speaking, or coaching. So I can definitely relate to what you're saying. And even the fact that God shows up when you absolutely need him to show up, because it's hard. It's a lot harder to notice God when everything is smooth sailing, and like, I talked to God, or I read the Bible this morning, but did it really sink in? Because everything's good. I don't really need anything. But then when you're literally relying on God, like, I need a client, I need some source of income, I don't know where it's coming, God, please help me. And I think that's a huge difference for sure.
Yeah. No, it's I don't know how many people will believe this, but I ended up seeing miracles in my life where there were times where I was like, I have no leads on clients, right? And I expected this. People told me, it's like, you're gonna go through maybe weeks, perhaps months, where nothing will be there, and you just have to learn to deal with it. And so I was like, oh, we're not getting anything at this point. It was really hot for some time, but especially near the holidays, it's like there was nothing for me, and I was just like, how are we going to do this? So
Yeah.
through that, that taking care of things, one day we just received a check on the, a money order on the mail for a few $100s, and they just with a note that said, Heavenly Father wanted me to send this to you.
Wow.
And I was just like, oh, that was a tender mercy, right? Because I had no idea who it was. He just showed up.
Wow.
And then just clients that I wasn't even aiming for just again showed up.
Wow.
And so the money came through very, very unexpected ways that had nothing to do with what I was doing in my own efforts. And so it was just like I said, you get to know him a lot better when you really need.
Oh, that's really good. It separates the people who say they believe to people who actually believe. And that definitely builds your faith. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. And he's also been my inspiration for most of my leadership things, right? It's just that servant leadership aspect. It's always been kind of like the example I've tried to follow. And so it helps me kind of differentiate what leaders I follow and like the things that I apply. But yeah, I think the best leaders out there are those who are willing to naturally put others first, or like you said, bring them up as you climb.
Yes. So that's so true. I don't know how familiar you are with John Maxwell or not. I know he does a lot of stuff in leadership, and I do Maxwell Leadership Certified, so I can teach on some of his stuff and coaching as well. And so he has something that he talks about, and I think it's funny. You may have heard it from someone else, but he said if you say that you're a leader and you look back and no one's following you, you're just taking a hike. It's like you're not leading anyone. And so like it's that whole thing about servant leadership is going to the people, not expecting the people to just follow you because you say, hey, I'm a leader, follow me. Some people are naturally going to do that because some people they look at authority and they do it. But most people want to build that relationship with the leader and understand, what are you going to do for me and how can I progress and do better?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I love that you said that if you look back and there's nobody following you, it's like you have the title. That's about it, right? I love the part where Simon Sinek uses this cool definition, right, of the leader. He's the strongest, the smartest. He gets the high paycheck. He gets all the wealth, but it is also expected that when the tiger, the danger comes, he's the first one on the line to protect the rest. And I was like, wow, that is extremely powerful, because that's what I've seen leaders, for example, that I would gladly follow, is leaders that, for example, my previous boss, he's a fantastic guy. I told him months in advance that I did not see a future in my company because I was pursuing something that the company could not offer. I told him what I was going to do. And instead of giving me more work that was like, well, you have to get this done at least before you leave, he started giving me work that would set me up for success in that next step.
Wow.
If I wanted to do coaching, he would give me training meetings. He would let me build courses, do things like that. And I was like, I still had to do my work, but he gave me the extra stuff, was things that would set me up. If at any point I had to, I couldn't make something because of family or sickness or whatever, he made sure that he got that, right? Whether he did it or things were rearranged. It was not of the, finger pointing. It's like, hey, you do it anyways. No, it was like he was there for me. And so he became a friend first, a manager second. And just had an amazing relationship with him. I would say I love the guy, I'd do anything for him because the way he behaved with me and the rest of his team, it showed.
That's super cool. It sounds like what you're saying. He put you first. He served you. And that's why you would pretty much do anything for him. We were talking about all he's done right now.
Yeah. And it's inspiring, right? It makes you want to become like this person. Because of my career coaching experience, I hear all sorts of stories from managers, and a lot of times they shock me because I'm like, wow, a manager did that, right? It was just, it's hard, but you see the contrast because of that, and you're thinking, wow, there's great leaders out there, and there's some who just have the title, but there is one thing that the great leaders always have, and that is their people, their actions inspire their people to love them and care for them, to follow them.
Yes. So that's really powerful. I just got reading a book called Humble Leadership. I can't remember who the author is, but it talks about that stuff as far as a lot of times in people in leadership, they operate at the level 1 area, which is just transactional, like you do this and you do this. But to really be effective, you have to go to level 2 and build those relationships. And that doesn't mean that, hey, we're going to hang out outside of work and do things, but it's really understanding what motivates that person. Like what you mentioned, that you told your boss, this is where I'm trying to go. And he took that and gave you opportunities to develop in those areas. And I don't know if you ever spent time with your boss outside of work, but despite that, like all the stuff that he took the time enough to understand you so that you could continue to develop.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It reminded me of a book. I don't know if you ever read, most likely, How to Win Friends and Influence People, I think it's called.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah.
So that book, the first time, I started reading through it, it was like, oh, it's basically a book on how to be nice, right? Like just be nice. That's it. But some of those were so interesting, like you said, like truly get to understand the person. And when I began to apply each one of these principles, I would try to apply it and not move on to the next chapter until I felt like, okay, now I understand what he means by this. Sometimes it take me weeks. There were some chapters that took me months because I was just like, I am not a good person. This is not coming natural to me. Right? Especially the put yourself in their shoes place chapter.
That's
that one. It took me about 2 months. Honestly, I was like, I naturally just go to me. Like I can't put myself in their shoes. And so, but there was one thing that they said, it's like, get to know them, ask about them, put yourself in the back seat, don't talk about yourself, just ask about them, remember their name, remember the details. And when I began to apply these things, you'd be surprised. Like I started to get good at remembering people's names. People that I met just in passing, I would go by and call them by their name and say, how are you? How is your name of your son, for example? And they would just catch them off guard. They were just like, you remember that? It's such a small detail, but it has such an impact because they think, wow, he took the time and the effort, the mental effort to remember me, my family. And it just shows that person cares, right? I'm not just a number or not just another digit in the team. It's like, I am somebody who he's looking out for. So it's the details that matter.
It reminds me of a quote also by John Maxwell. It says, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So like what you mentioned right there, the time, it's what you said, the things that we think are really little show up big in the long run.
Yeah, 100%. It's how relationships are formed, right? Like your best friends or things like that because they know the little details, they care about it. There's a difference between the manager who texts you and says, hey, we need this done, to the one that says, hey, how are you doing? How's your workload? And then once you tell them, it's like, well, I could do a bit more. It's like, okay, would you mind helping us with this? Right? This is what showed up. It's just a huge difference. Just the fact that they ask, how are you doing?
Yes.
It's just, we see it. We're like, oh, it's small, but it's not. We want to feel like we care, we matter, especially to those around us.
Yeah. No, that's so true. So I know you talked about the positive, but I'm sure you have some stories about the negative, even if it's just little things, whether it's with you or with clients that you've heard. Anything come to mind as far as like how did this person become a leader by doing things like this?
Yeah. So I'll share some of mine because there's respect out of others. I went to leadership positions, but in the past, I remember one particular thing that I look back and I'm like, I still cringe about it. Okay. Wow. And it was basically a lack of accountability on my part. It was a time where my manager asked me to do certain things and I forgot completely to do one thing. But during the meetings, I think I mentioned it in passing, like, oh, this is not done yet, but we didn't address it. Anyways, we had a meeting and they were discussing the progress and I presented it as like, yeah, it's all done, right? And my manager said, oh, what about this thing? And I was in my mind, I knew I failed. I knew it was my fault But for some reason, and this was just like the pride in me, the lack, I don't know what it was, the lack of accountability. I was like, oh, but I told you about this. And I kind of pointed it to her. And I was like, I told you about this, right? And you didn't say anything. And looking back, I was like, oh, wow, I lost the accountability piece there. And so she kind of pointed it back to me, right? I think she was trying to be kind in it, but I just kind of held my ground to that. It wasn't my fault. And even when we talked afterwards, she kind of said, it's like, well, you know, there was a lack of accountability, and I still wouldn't accept it. And so I was like, man, I look back and I'm thinking, man, I made a lot of mistakes there. But it really taught me about accountability because it stuck with me. That was years ago, but it stuck with me. I was like, I need to take accountability for all my actions, especially as a leader. If I make a mistake, I own it. Like I can't point the finger at anybody else, whether it's a team. And even if I think it's their mistake, I need to look at myself first, right? There was something, I'm the leader. I'm the one that holds the responsibility. So look at myself first. How can we address it in the future? And how can we fix it now? Rather than just finger pointing. But that was one thing I will say that I look back and I'm like, I'm glad I learned from that rather than just being like, nope, it's never my fault, right?
Yeah, I have some stories of like leaders they'll take the credit when things go well, and when things go wrong, it's your fault. Like, like it's a lose-lose. You just can't win with that. No, it's true. And that's one thing that the book of like Dale Carnegie has also taught me. And it's, you know, that quote that he shares, you attract more flies with honey than with vinegar. Yes.
I noticed, like, even if they know they're wrong, they're still not going to admit it, you know? And I remember that as an engineer, I would bring facts and figures, and I'm like, this is why it's right. But if it was against somebody's belief, they will find any way to resist it, right? And so that's the piece where I had to be more and more understanding, more accountable for my own failures. Through, like you said, that humility piece, you know, like it allows people to not see you as a threat, but as an actual partner, somebody who will help them. And at that point, they begin to collaborate with you.
And that's so true. You mentioned the humility because, excuse me, a lot of times people think humility is thinking less of yourself, but it's not thinking less of yourself. It's just thinking of yourself less. And
I like that.
Of others first.
No, 100%. Yeah, I think it's being open to the idea that you don't know everything, right? Because I think it can be very attractive, especially if as you grow in your career, as you learn more, to say, oh, I've seen it all. This is how it plays out, right? Yes. And it doesn't. Like, we cannot predict the future to that degree. And especially moving to a new company, I've noticed that I may have the best resume and experience. I can't just come in and just hear what they've done and put my new system in place. You know, that's the humility part, basically saying, I don't know. That's what it hurts sometimes.
And I don't know how you feel about this, but my thought is that I think it's often harder for engineers because we're always told that we're the experts, we know everything. And so to be told that all the time and then go into the situation that you don't know everything, you're pushing back at it and say, like, I should know everything. And then I think that what creates a lot of conflict as well.
Yeah. I think it's the title engineer. I think it's overrated, honestly. You know, there were places where I was in a team where there was a couple engineers, but most of them were operators, people who, you know, just basically went to high school. And a lot of times they would put the engineers on a pedestal. Now it's very, very, very tempting to own the pedestal, to be like, yeah, I know everything, right? Yeah. But you don't realize that these people really know a lot because that's their trade. You know, they might not get a degree, but they worked in that industry for 10, 15 years and they know it better than you do. Like, they know, they have experience, the school of experience having taught them a lot more than you can learn in a book. So like, I remember this guy who I was trying to read the blueprints and understand the flow of things. And I was trying to predict it. And the guy is like, yeah, it's going to happen here, you know? And I'm like, it doesn't make sense based on what I see. And it happened exactly as he predicted it. And I was like, he's like, yeah, I've been working here for 25 years. And I'm like, Yep, you know more. So, humble myself and let the guy go. I mean, he didn't have an engineering degree or anything, but just his time out there doing what he's done gives him so much knowledge that I would be foolish to neglect it or to say I'm going to do things my way. And fortunately for me, he was the kind of person that was always very nice, but also told you honestly, he's like, hey, this is what's going to happen. I'm not going to take offense if you don't follow me, but this is what's going to happen. And there's amazing people out there, by the way.
Yeah, that's so true. They have all that knowledge from the day in, day out. And then we just come in like, oh yeah, I do this. I wrote the drawing. I wrote the specs on this. Like, this is how it's gonna work. They're like, no, it's not. And it goes exactly how they said it. And the thing is, like what you were saying is that you can fall into that rhythm of thinking you know everything. But if you're a true leader, you have the humility enough to come back and say, I was wrong. We should have done it this way. You continue to learn as a leader, because I think sometimes people think that you're a leader and you know everything and you just do everything and you just kind of stay at that pedestal. But it's like, no, we're constantly learning as leaders. We mess up, but the best leaders don't let their mistakes be their downfall. They learn from their mistakes and keep moving forward.
Yeah, I love that. That's something I had to learn quite a bit also, that, fail forward aspect.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of psychological safety.
Yeah.
Amy Edmondson. Yeah. The first time it was introduced to me, I was in a position of leadership, and it really changed my perspective, because I kept asking myself, I kept looking at meetings that I would lead, how many people are speaking and how many people are not. And I noticed that a lot of times I was kind of just taking over the meeting. I was pushing my agenda, and sometimes people would comment, a lot of times they wouldn't. And I started to come with high level points, even though I had a plan, but I would let them create it, and it created more discussion. Like, people started to talk more, and it was like, hey, the plan is better, but not only is it better, they actually want to work on the plan rather than me telling them what to do. So that psychological safety was huge, because they feel like, hey, I have a voice, and he acts on it. Yes. Right? It's a very different thing. It takes effort, right? Because if they were to say, hey, we should do this, and you do the total opposite, they're probably not going to like that. But if you try it, and they are willing to work, I've noticed that when somebody, even if they were to make a mistake, a lot of times they will own it because it was their idea, right? They will own it, we will resolve it, and then we move forward. We fail, and we fail quickly. And it's just like, just things move rather than stalling in place, not figuring out like, why is it not working, right? Because maybe people are like, I don't want to tell them that I messed up, right? Because it's the fear.
Definitely. No, I love that. Well, we're about out of time. That really flew by.
It did.
Is there anything that we haven't talked about yet that you want to talk about, or anything?
Yeah, I would say to anyone listening, if you don't know what psychological safety is, because I keep running into people that don't know about it, figure out, go to YouTube, Google Amy Edmondson, psychological safety, and you'll notice the impact that it has in your career. But more than that, I will say it's had a huge impact in my life, because the moment I was able to speak honestly at work and not carry this mental stress of like, well, this is going to work, this is not going to work, and they don't know what they're doing, right? You have this mental stress, you stop taking that home. And then, if you really embrace the concept, you'll start also building psychological safety in your own home, where your kids, your wife, your parents, they can talk to you honestly, knowing that first, you won't be offended by it, and two, that you're willing to understand them. So it'll do wonders for communication at home and also at work. And it makes things flow so much better. So that would be my piece of advice to anyone who doesn't know. Go Google that up, and hopefully you embrace the concept.
Yes, definitely. And I'll find a video for Amy Edmondson. I'll link that in the show notes for this podcast as well. And I definitely want to highlight you and all the stuff you're doing. So talk about like where you are on social. I know you're linked on LinkedIn. That's how we met on LinkedIn. But any other socials or websites, or how can people connect with you, or anything coming up?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is usually the best place. My website where I have that course is eccoaching.org. But yeah, you can find that on LinkedIn. There's a link right there. So LinkedIn is kind of like my go-to.
Awesome. That's really cool. So for everyone listening, if you're only listening, you're not watching, I'll say it again. You should be watching the podcast, subscribe to the podcast. But I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Erick, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast, learning about how you are transforming people's career, making them have fearless careers, not being afraid of getting fired, and just going after what they actually want to do, and understanding that work does not have to suck. It can be something that they enjoy, and all the stuff you're doing in leadership. It's just phenomenal to talk with you about this.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I really appreciate it. If there's anything I can do for you or any one of your listeners, I'll be happy to do so. Just reach out.
Well, you heard it. Reach out to Erick if you are looking into your career. Maybe you feel fear, feel that imposter syndrome, that you feel like you don't belong, you don't know what you're doing. Definitely reach out to Erick, connect with him. And I hope you enjoyed this episode and keep being incredible.
Thank you for listening to the IncrediPaul podcast with Paul Ferranbi. We hope you enjoyed. Be sure to rate and review this podcast on your favorite podcast listening platform. We'll see you here next time. And be incredible. Incredible.